Good afternoon at this point, I believe. So this is a project I did. I was inspired by some reading I did in Dr. McGinnis's Democracy and Discipline class last semester. And it deals with questions of where the law applies to disenfranchised and disrespected minorities throughout the United States' history through the lens of contractarianism, which is just a long word for social contract theory, or a shorter word, and democracy. So in Dr. McGinnis's class, I read this section of Michel Foucault in a 1973 lecture at the College of France. And he said that social laws are made by people for whom they are not intended and applied to those who did not make them. So I read this and it really struck me. And I knew that there were definitely some discrepancies between the people we see in power, say for example in Congress, and the people we see affected by those laws, the American public as a whole. So I did some further research, and the results are upsetting. So this is the racial breakdown of Congress and the American public, Congress on the left and the American public on the right. So you can see this is the most recent Congress. Congress is 77% white, the American public is 60% white. Another notable difference is the difference between 8.5% of Congress is Hispanic, while over double that proportion is the American public. And along the bottom here, the average American is 38, the average representative is 59, and the average senator is 65. So there are some pretty large gaps here that I felt warranted further research. So then I had a research question. So the question was, how does the dichotomy of lawmakers and lawbreakers, because that extreme only gets worse the farther you move from, say, Congress, the American public, and then, say, incarcerated Americans or disenfranchised felons, it just gets more and more diverse the farther you go along, which is definitely concerning. So how does the dichotomy of lawmakers and lawbreakers indicate fundamental issues in the U.S. regarding democracy, punishment, and justice? So then my thesis was the exclusion or underrepresentation of minorities from the lawmaking process delegitimizes any punishment they receive for violating these laws due to a breach in the social contract. I know it's a lot of phrases, so let's break it down a little bit here. So first, let's just go through these two subheadings of my paper and make sure we know what those mean. So in defining the social contract, it's agreement among members of a society to cooperate for social benefits. Sorry, I hear feedback. Does anybody else hear feedback? Okay. It's agreement among members of society to cooperate for social benefits. So if the government acts contrary to a common interest, there's a right of rebellion that's involved, which is instituted under Locke and also a couple of the other social contract theory, Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau. And this also includes the right of the government or the state to punishment. And the social contract theory, along with the idea of inalienable rights and consent of the governed, all came along sort of hand in hand in the Enlightenment in the 1700s or so. And a lot of this language sparked the Haitian Revolution, the French Revolution, and even the American Revolution. I think it might be in my Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So I said it right there. Definitely valuable to the United States' founding, what we might call the spirit or the values of the essential values of the United States today. The second part here is democracy. So there were two thinkers that I was looking at in considering who should be included and who should be excluded from the democratic process. The first is Robert Dahl, and basically the entire argument is democracy has to include everyone or it's not a democracy. Ludwig Beckmann takes a more complex view and argues we should include a careful mix of inclusion and exclusion because being included means exercising legal power over the other participants. So the included should only include those subject to the decisions of that group, and people who are not subject to the decisions of that group should not be included in the decision-making process. This kind of ties us back to Foucault when we think about these two groups being separate or not overlapping as much as Beckmann might say they should. So then John Rawls is one of the main thinkers I was using in this paper. So if you ask John Rawls what is justice, John Rawls would reply, fairness. So just some basic definitions here. So the basic structure is the political and social institutions that comprise social cooperation and are responsible for the distribution of benefits and burdens, which is words that Rawls uses a lot. And the veil of ignorance is a hypothetical situation designed to create impartial decisions regarding the basic structure by withholding potentially biasing information. And Rawls in this situation is being viewed as a contract thinker because in his veil of ignorance, citizens are coming together to make a collective decision about what they collectively should do. And then Tommie Shelby takes Rawls's idea and applies them to what we know to be longstanding biases in the American political structure and society today, and basically says that this indicates that the United States' basic structure is skewed, we need to fix it. And basically, as a result, we're seeing unequal membership in the demos. So basically, the allegiance of those members to the state cannot be assumed, and they may have the right to opt out or revoke their right to be governed, revoke their consent to be governed. So therefore, knowing that the United States has a notable legacy of discriminatory, racist, unfair, as Rawls might say, foundations, and knowing that we gave up inalienable rights to participate in this basic structure, which we know is not fairly distributing benefits and burdens, and it's only getting worse as it is being regulated by and shaped by a group that is poorly representative of the United States. Again, seeing that inclusion-exclusion dichotomy here, excluding some and over-including, over-representing some people who maybe should just get their fair share. The right to non-consent or the right to rebellion as founded in law exists, and basically calls into question the legitimacy of state punishment because state punishment can only come from the sovereign. So there's some questions to consider as a result of that. If this is true, then the legitimacy of state punishment has been in question for quite a while, but we've let it be in question for quite a while. So is the legitimacy of state punishment relevant to our society? Is that something we should be thinking about? Is it possible to reorganize the state under a justice as fairness model with a hypothetical veil of ignorance? And should we want to do that? And if we were to redesign the basic structure, how would we go about it? And then just summing it all up here, here's my thesis again. Basically going through that argument, an increasingly unjust basic structure with the inequalities in inclusion and exclusion, and the right to non-consent, the right to rebellion. And then if the legitimacy of the United States' punishment is in question, the legitimacy of the United States as a sovereign might also be in question. So those are very delicate things that need to be considered here. And also we need to think about what does revoking consent look like practically? And that's all I've got. Thank you.